don't write something new for every cue. It's not necessary, and it's actually bad because it really distracts the audience. Hi there, my name is Paul Thomson. I'm a composer. I've written lots of different types of music for different types of media over the years, from commercials, for which I've written music for Sony, Heineken, British Airways, Ford, lots of different companies. I've written lots of music for the Little Big Planet franchise over the years, cinematic music and adaptive music that changes according to what the player's doing. I've written music for TV, including the BAFTA-winning The Fades for the BBC and BBC America. And I've written music for film, and Half of a Yellow Sun is one of my favourite projects that I've done in that sphere. That's a little bit about me and my background. Now, what's the point of this video? This video is all of the things that you need to do to get mentally, creatively, practically prepared before you start scoring on a job. So it's before you even start writing a note of music. What are the steps that you need to go through, and some things you may not have thought of to get yourself ready? So the first and probably most important step in preparing to score is the conversation with the director. It's almost always a director, but there may be somebody else who is the kind of author of the piece. We're thinking about the person whose creative vision it is that you are working with the team towards to try and achieve that creative vision. So the director will probably have some ideas already about the kind of style that they want the score to be and the way that they want it to work. A key thing here is for you to interpret what the director's saying, but not feel completely constrained. This is not a situation in which you are supposed to be taking dictation. You have to come to the project with a creative viewpoint, but you have to obviously take into account what the director is saying as well. Now, things to help you guide your director to give you as much useful information as possible are trying to encourage them not to talk in too much detail in musical terms, because quite often a director will ask you for something that they don't actually really want because they may be confused about the musical term. But it's to get them to talk about emotion and about colour and about storytelling. The things that maybe the pictures or the actors' performances are not conveying that need to be conveyed. So any subtext, psychological aspects to the visuals and things like that. There are often things that a composer can do to speed up or slow down scenes. And paradoxically, it might be that writing slower music helps you speed up a scene if the director feels that the pace is slightly laggy, slightly too slow. Scoring is something that you can study and study and study it, but you really only learn how to do it by actually doing it. And that's why it's a really great idea to team up at the beginning of your career with student filmmakers who are also learning their craft, so you can get as much practice as possible. It's sometimes useful to use other scores as examples of the kind of thing that's working maybe to a specific scene, or maybe the director will have there's something in that piece of music that really speaks to them, and they want to try and achieve that in the score as well, which takes us into temp scores. And you'll often have a piece of music, we call it a temp score, that's been laid up against the picture during the edit process. And these can be useful, or they can be extremely painful because everybody has heard the temp score with the pictures so much that they've become attached to it. So can be a little bit of a dangerous area there. It's great if the relationship that you have with the director enables you to try things and fail. That's always really useful. If you can establish that trust bond, you don't have to always hit it out of the park the first time. For example, Jerry Goldsmith, one of his most famous pieces is the main title theme to the film Basic Instinct. And that was actually version 17 before he finally hit on the thing that was absolutely perfect for that project. So that takes us to the second step, and this is the spotting session. Spotting is the process of going through the film with the director and working out where you want the music to start and stop, any particular what we call sync points or synchronization points that you want things to happen. The director may say they want a big bang at a certain moment on a certain cut, or for example there may be a mood change or a key change. at a certain stage to give you a kind of a new step in the story, a new sense of impending doom. And this process is really, really valuable. It's the first time that you'll kind of get all of the information that you need from the director to enable you to write the correct music for the scene. Don't worry too much about being really frame accurate when you're doing this. Just get a kind of rough idea, but make sure that your notes state the intention behind each decision. So, for example, I won't bother going backwards and forwards and wasting time trying to find an exact frame for when a cue starts. But I will say music creeps in underneath car pulling out of drive or something like that. So you know what the intention is, and then you can make those kind of fine-tuning decisions later on when you're sitting in your studio on your own and you can try a few different things. One thing which is really interesting is the way that you hit a specific sync point. Now, there's a very different kind of psychological effect as the viewer to when an impact, for example, happens on a cut, or just before a cut, or just after a cut. And that's something that you should experiment with and see what the differences are. And that can really help to change the experience of the viewer, and whether things really shock them, or whether they're expecting something, or whether you're pushing the scene forward or trying to hold it back a little bit. There's all kinds of different things like that. And as I say, these are all decisions that you need to make in the studio on your own before you go back to the director with a first pass. Now, step 3 is the template. It's always useful on these kind of jobs to have a template to work to, because otherwise every single time you open a cue, you're looking for sounds, maybe the same sounds, maybe you end up using different sounds, and then your score doesn't have a kind of cohesion throughout it. So you want to have a template that's going to work for the project and that is going to have the sounds. I try to make it sound produced. And what I mean by that is, if I know, just to take a really simple example, if I know that there's going to be some pizzicato strings in there, then there are lots of different ways you can do this. They either can be tight and dry and almost sound like Herman-esque, I might say, like very, very in your face and kind of punchy. Or you might want them to be really dreamy. So you might have a super long reverb and you sit them right back, use a very ambient sample library. These are decisions that kind of come as part of the creation of the kind of feel and overall mood and vibe of the score. So they're the decisions that you need to make at the beginning. Now, obviously you can change this stuff, but I always find that if I'm writing and I'm hearing the sound that's as close to the finished sound as possible, it makes me feel more creative and enables me to write better music. So it's always worth setting this stuff up right at the start. And so you'll find that your template evolves throughout the project. So this is a really great way to kind of keep the changes and the evolution of the project and capture it and enable you to use it on the next cue. So I guess a key thing to remember is, once you've made a template, don't feel constricted by it. Allow it to grow and allow it to change. Talking about pictures brings us to step 4, which is video content. Now, you will get different types of video content throughout different stages of the project. So at the very beginning, there are things called rushes or dailies, which are really pretty much unedited, just takes of scenes, or they may be very, very roughly edited together without any real reference to the timing or the pacing or anything like that. Not massively useful for a composer, apart from they might give you a feel of the mood and the way that characters are being performed by the actors. And this can be useful because it can help you to pitch the kind of music that you're writing to work better with the performances. The next thing from that would be rough cuts. So you might have a cut, and for a 1 hour TV episode, the first rough cut might be 1 hour and 20 minutes long. Equally, for a 1 hour 30 feature, the first cut might be 2.5 hours even. So there's a lot of stuff that is going to be removed when you get to the final cut. So you need to bear that in mind and not be too hung up on the way that the timings work within each scene. The likelihood is that it will change and that you'll have to then try and cut your music down and conform to each different cue. So there's not a huge amount of use in kind of writing specifically to picture at this stage. But the rough cut gives you a really good idea of the whole thing. So it's a great place to start when you're coming up with theme ideas. And if you're writing a theme suite, for example, which might be a 20 minutes of music, it could be a continuous through composed piece of music, or it might just be discrete pieces. But let's say you're getting a load of ideas together of things that you think are going to work. It's very, very hard to do that before you've seen anything. And the rough cut is a great place to start because it gives you so much information about the film. Now, in the old days, there used to be a fine cut, it was called, or a locked picture edit. And this is kind of a thing of the past now, apart from maybe on some very low budget projects, or sometimes TV projects will get to a fine cut. But even there, a lot of things are still kind of moving around. And now that we're in a kind of non-linear TV viewing world in which you have, streaming services where they don't have to worry about when the ads are going to come in and all that kind of stuff, don't have to worry about keeping to specific lengths. We're in a world of non-linear editing, and so you need to be prepared for the fact that the cut is just going to keep changing. I would say that instead of saying fine cut or locked cut, what we should say is maybe advanced cut or something like that. Or, you kind of know that it's pretty much there. And when you're writing, you need to be slightly careful. If you've got a scene where there are lots and lots of action points, lots of things to hit, you need to have that conversation with the filmmakers in advance and say, right, do you think this is going to change much? And that helps you write music that is going to work if you do need to start putting in chops here and there and, different bar lengths and stuff like that so that you can stay on the cut. If you've got a great music editor to work with, then sometimes that makes it a lot easier because the music editor can help you conform to each new cut that comes in. So that brings us on to point 5, which is finding the right tempo, finding the right time signature, pacing the music to the pictures. Now, this is a really interesting balancing act, and this is another kind of set of decisions that you need to make. Because if you have, let's say, a piece of music that's going to last X amount of time, and you know that you want something to happen and you want to lock onto that right in the middle of the cue, then you've got a set of decisions to make. You've got to work out, firstly, do you want that to happen at the beginning of a bar? That can often be really good, but sometimes, depending on the music, depending on the visuals, it can look a little bit hokey. So you kind of think, I don't want to hit that right. I need to hit it on a beat, or maybe on an offbeat. Musically, I want to make it sound like I'm approaching it and there's a meaning there, and we're getting there deliberately. But it doesn't want to be on the first beat of the bar. So that's the first decision. Second decision is with your time signature. Are you going to try to reach that point at that moment and you've decided what beat of the bar it's going to be on? Are you going to reach it by scaling the tempo so that to the nearest bar you end up in the right place? Or does that work less well than deciding that you're going to put a different measure, a different time signature somewhere in the middle to take you so that you still end up on the beat, but you don't have to change your overall tempo? So in other words, you might say, let's say that the whole piece is in 4/4, very straightforward, but you might put a 2/4 bar in or a 3/4 bar in the middle so that you get to the hit point at the point that you want to in the bar, rather than having to change the tempo, which might compromise the music that you're writing. Now, there are lots of other creative ways of using meter changes, and I often mix up a load of meter changes. So I might have, I've written a piece where there was 7/8 bar and a 5/4 bar, and they just alternated all the way through, and then you hit 3/4 for a section. It's a really great way of keeping things fresh, making sure that the viewer doesn't get too comfortable in what they're hearing, and they're not, you keep them slightly off balance. So there's always something unexpected coming up, which is sometimes really, really useful. Now we get to point 6, which is called taking a break. Now this is maybe counterintuitively an incredibly important part of the creative process, is to leave the studio, walk away from the computer, go out into the real world, into the sunshine, do something different, go for a walk. Anne Dudley told me that she often will go for a walk to either allow an idea to kind of brew, or sometimes if she's stuck, she'll go for a walk and the answer will come. You sometimes need to let your subconscious brain work on something. And if you stop chasing the solution so hard with your conscious mind, then the answer will just come to you. Now, there's that, but there's also the fact that it's really, really good for you to kind of not become completely studio bound and to go out and get fresh air, get some exercise. You've got to keep everything in balance. It's a very hard job, especially on a kind of towards the end of a project where the cut is changing and you're running out of time and there's a lot of music to write. It can become very stressful and you can end up working long hours. But we've got to remember, we're not brain surgeons, we're not saving people's lives. And so you've got to keep everything in balance. And you'll find that if you apply some discipline to this and you don't allow yourself to just sit up all night trying to hammer through as much as you can, that you will get stuff done quicker. Short, focused bursts of activity will always generate more end results than brutally going through hours and hours and hours and not allowing yourself to get up and have a break. So that's a really important thing to remember as well. So that's an overview of all the things that, if you like, practically I would do to get ready to start writing. The next kind of hurdle, the next battle is the blank page. It's sitting there thinking, as all composers do, most composers, I don't know what I'm doing really. As Hans Zimmer has said on many occasions, this is the point where he always thinks, I'm going to get found out this time. I'm just a chancer, don't really know what I'm doing. We all feel like this. We all feel like this when we're starting a job. And you just need to get something down. You just need to start writing. And even if you think what you're doing is terrible, keep building it. Then you've got something that you can work on and that you can reshape. It's just vital to actually get going. John Williams has always said, this idea of a bolt from the blue, of a kind of, creative burst of, inspiration, it just doesn't exist. It's a hard job, like sculpting a statue. You just have to get on with it. And ideas will come at the 8th hour, not at the beginning where the whole thing is birthed in one bright shower of inspiration. It just doesn't happen. So you've got to sit and do it. It's hard work. It's a job. Just have to chip away at it, and eventually you get to the end line. So how do I keep myself coming up with fresh ideas and different things? There are different things that you can try to help inspire yourself. One thing which John Powell told me he does is he will change sometimes the keyboard so that it plays in an unexpected way. And I really love this. And there's an easy way to kind of force the keyboard into a specific mode or a specific scale. That's often quite useful because it ties you, if you know, okay, these 4 bars are octatonic scale in the, starting on C or whatever, then you could set that in and then just busk around and try and find some ideas. I mean, John does things which are different, which are more complicated, like changing the way that the keyboard works, maybe reversing it altogether, things like that, which can unlock anything that you can do that forces you away from all the things that you usually do when you sit at the keyboard or when you sit at the guitar. With a guitar, you could detune some strings so that you have a new tuning, and that might, unlock some interesting new ideas for you as well. I'll just give you a quick example here. I'm using the Transposer plugin. This is a MIDI plugin in Logic. And as you can see, it comes up with the scale. Now I can just, if I take out some of these notes, then I've got a kind of C minor tonality here. Anything that I play, it will retune any notes that I've deselected to the nearest note. So that sounds like this. So you can see I'm playing all kinds of stuff on the keyboard, but the only notes it's allowing me to play are the notes in the scale that I've specified. So that's one easy way to do that. I've always loved any synth or plugin or sound engine of any kind that allows you to randomize things. I was thinking about that when we designed BT Phobos with BT, and we built that into there. So there's a randomize engine in that as well. It's a great way of coming up with mad stuff that you would never have thought of making. So I love that. Any kind of randomization into the process. Brian Eno created this wonderful set of cards called Oblique Strategies, and they come up with all kinds of strange ideas to get you to do something different to the thing that you would usually do in the creative process. So anything that can kind of interrupt or subvert your normal creative flow is a great way of maintaining your creativity and also distracting you from the fact that, you haven't written the piece yet. So helping to kind of get you moving in different ways. Now, all of those things that I'm talking about are you sitting at the DAW, looking at the screen, writing a piece of music bar by bar. And I remember a fantastic image of from the King Kong production diaries of James Newton Howard sitting, writing to picture, and he would just start the picture going and do a little bit and then start it again and do a little bit. And at one point he turns to the camera and says, one bar at a time. And that is a fantastic way to write to picture. A lot of composers I know back up, maybe 8 bars, allow the picture to run, and then they kind of get an idea for how the next thing should be, the next bar, how it should go, where the piece might progress. That's a fantastic way to write. But there are 2 other ways to write. So the first one is to move away from the computer altogether and try to just imagine in your mind's ear what the piece of music is. So you might do that in a kind of, there are 2 different ways of doing it. One I call a kind of cloud way, which is to try and just picture a kind of soundscape, and you won't have much detail in it, but it'll give you an idea of things. And if you just kind of shut off all your other senses, try and sit somewhere quiet, close your eyes, and just try and allow your mind to create. Very rarely are we inventing something brand new. We're often taking all of our, influences, and we're applying them to the task of creating a new piece of music. And so that's what's so fascinating about the way that different composers approach the same scene. You'll approach things differently because your mind's eye is trained by all the stuff that you've listened to in the past. So that's one thing. You can incorporate pen and paper into this. And I'm not saying that you have to be able to read music to do this, but I would encourage definitely anybody who doesn't know how to read music to learn. It's really pretty straightforward. I'm not saying you need to get yourself up to the level of a kind of professional sight reading, session musician. But if you are able to write, to hear a melody in your head and then write it down on score paper, that's incredibly useful. If you can't do that though, write down either as shapes or write the note names. I quite often approach something with a blank piece of A4 and I'll write chord symbols down. And that can be a great way of kind of accessing that part of your brain. Again, it's things that aren't where you're not actually sitting at the keyboard doing the things that you kind of tend to repeat and do the same kind of moves again and again. Another way of doing this is Eric Whittaker has this technique where he'll have a big piece of paper and he'll sketch out graphically what he wants the piece to be. And this is a great way of kind of finding a shape and a kind of arc to a piece of music. What is the third way? Well, the third way, we're going back to the keyboard, but not necessarily the DAW keyboard. There's 2 ways of doing this. So this is improvisation. And I've heard Steve Vai, fabulous guitarist, say that improvisation is a perfectly valid and important part of composition. And there are lots of other musicians who say the same thing. This is not busking and hoping for the best and cheating and not, doing your work properly and all that kind of stuff. Lose all of those ideas that improvisation is bad and set up a camera, set up a microphone, just play and you'll come up with interesting ideas. You'll find useful little snippets and bits and pieces. That's another thing that John Powell said to me. He will often he'll actually sit with the DAW running, so he'll be recording the MIDI. He'll just play for an hour, 2 hours, and then he'll come back to it and he'll go through it in detail, and he'll say, you might find 4 or 5 bits that really work well and that have interesting germs of ideas in that you can then use as kind of seeds to grow more complex and more fully developed musical ideas. The final thought that I wanted to leave you with is about organisation. It's great to organise your time to develop and keep a spreadsheet, and I've got some examples of this in my book, and so that you are able to concentrate on what you're doing and not have a kind of background cloud of panic about the fact that you're only a certain way through and you still have X amount of music to write. If you feel like you're in control of the project, then you will write better music. There's no doubt about that, because you can concentrate on what you're doing and allow yourself to be free and to experiment. And the way that I kind of think about the time allocation in a really, in a really kind of holistic way of a whole project is I think about the first third as being the kind of ideation, the conceptualization, however you might put it, all of the kind of playing and around and kind of thinking, what's the meaning behind this? What am I trying to put together? What's the concept of the overall score, the instrumentation and all that kind of stuff? The second third of the time is when you start actually you start building, making, sculpting, if you like. And that might be writing themes, cue ideas, story arc ideas, sound design. You might connect up a load of gear, start making some fresh sounds for the project. That's always a really great way to access creativity. That's the kind of period of really intense creation and experimentation. And then the final third is the job of putting the notes down, making the cues, attaching the music to the picture, making sure it works, doing all the kind of mechanical stuff. And yes, these will tend to blend into each other a little bit. You'll still be writing stuff in the final third probably, but if you try to kind of create your bag of tools for that final third in the middle of your allotted time, then when you go into it, it's just so much easier. There's an interesting thing if you look at the way that film scores work, in particular, and this applies to applies to TV especially, to games, to all kinds of different ways of creating music for media. You'll find that there tend to be, maybe even just 3 or 4 different kind of thematic ideas in an overall score, and then they're developed and they're treated in different ways. And that's the kind of craft of the job is don't write something new for every cue. It's not necessary, and it's actually bad because it really distracts the audience. The viewer can't really work out what's going on if the music's constantly changing. You need to help them through the story. You're a storyteller, working with a team of storytellers. And the best way to do that is to have a smallish number of ideas in your palette, and then you develop those ideas. So, the most obvious way of doing it is you might have a theme that is in a major key for a certain character, and then something sad happens to them and you put the theme in a minor key. Now that's really doing something that sounds blindingly obvious, but you can extend and subvert different ways of treating your melodies and your ideas, your themes, and then use those new ideas to generate really interesting cues for the film. And there's something in our subconscious where we'll recognize as a viewer, we'll recognize a clip of music, a piece of music as being related to something else. And these are all incredibly useful ways of helping tell the story. So I hope that that's been useful as a kind of overview, a kind of top-down view of the things that I do before I start scoring, but also just getting over that kind of initial hurdle of actually getting going, getting yourself started, and getting your creativity sparked. There's lots and lots of great detail, lots of interesting videos from all kinds of different talented composers on the Academy website and on our YouTube channel. So do check in on the Academy website. It's all sorted into really useful categories, and you'll find loads of good stuff on there to help keep you going on the journey, developing your skill set, and writing some beautiful music, or some dark and threatening, mysterious music, if that's what the job requires. Thank you very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.